Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Last night, the Pakistan Supreme Court delivered a stunning verdict in defense of the country's democracy. It's literally created a political earthquake, an earthquake whose tremors will be felt for months and years, if not generations. And let me add, I cannot think of a single Supreme Court in our part of the world, and I'm consciously including our own in India, that has stood up in defense of democracy in this bold, defiant, and striking way. Joining me now from Lahore in Pakistan to talk about the Supreme Court's verdict and its implications for Pakistan's democracy and for the future, so far as we can see it today, is the country's foremost journalist, the editor-in-chief of the Friday Times, and the former caretaker chief minister of Pakistan's Punjab province, Najam Sethi. Najam Sethi, let me start with what must be the obvious question. How do you view last night's unanimous Supreme Court decision declaring the Deputy Speaker's ruling dismissing the no confidence vote as unconstitutional, countermanding the dissolution of the Assembly by the President, and ordering that the vote of no confidence must be held Saturday, i.e., tomorrow? How do you view that package?
Thank you, Karan. I think all Democrats in this country think that this is a turning point in Pakistan's journey on democracy, which has been a stumbling one. The reason for that is that historic Supreme Court judgments have all been pegged to what we call the law of necessity, meaning when the generals have imposed martial law, they've had the guns, so the court has said that a successful takeover is like a revolution, you can't really challenge it. And so the law of necessity has prevailed. And yesterday, the law of necessity was on trial again, because there were arguments that although what had happened was unconstitutional, but the law of necessity demanded, in the national interest, it was quoted, that we move on and hold the elections that Imran Khan had ordered 3 months hence. And the court overturned that. The court said no, the national interest is the interest of the Constitution, and there's no separate thing. And therefore, we think we have buried the law of necessity now for all times to come. Certainly, we hope so. So this is such a far-reaching judgment that the Constitution in its purity has been upheld, and the national interest has been equated with the upholding of the Constitution. This will go a long way in emboldening the court and the judges to stand up in defense of democracy and human rights.
Am I right in saying that it's not just that the Supreme Court has struck down actions taken in the past by the Speaker or by the President? It's also given crystal clear orders about how people like the Prime Minister, the President, and Speaker must behave in the days to come, i.e., the order also applies to the future, and I believe right up till the new Prime Minister is elected.
You're absolutely right. That is a very significant clause. It comes right at the end of the short order and is very explicit. It says that the President and the Prime Minister and the Speaker shall, it implies this, they shall in no way thwart the orders of the court to hold not just the vote of no confidence in its entirety, but also to enable the Parliament to elect the next leader of the House, i.e., the next Prime Minister, forthwith. So that is a very profound intervention. It not only ab initio negates everything that has happened since that fateful day of the 3rd of April, which was illegal and unconstitutional, it also now puts a stop to any further encroachments on the Constitution by these three gentlemen, or indeed perhaps even the Deputy Speaker. So I think this is the people are discussing the implications of this, especially in view of the fact that the sitting Prime Minister, because the National Assembly has been restored, Imran Khan is still Prime Minister until he's dethroned tomorrow through the vote of no confidence. Imran Khan has said that he intends to address the nation tonight. He's holding a cabinet meeting as we speak, and his people are saying that he still has a surprise up his sleeve that he's going to announce tonight. So there are apprehensions about whether he will quietly go home in a dignified manner, i.e. by resigning, or whether he will again resort to some form of unconstitutionalism or perhaps an appeal before the Supreme Court against this judgment in order to once again thwart what is supposed to happen tomorrow.
But as you said, that last part of the Supreme Court's judgment is a crystal clear warning to Imran Khan and the president, no hera peri. I'm putting it in colloquial terms, but what they're saying is no more tricks, no more gimmicks, no more surprises. Abide by the constitution, not just till the vote of no confidence is held, but until the new prime minister is elected.
Yes, absolutely right. No era peri.
In which case, let me put it like this before I go further. This is a very proud moment for Pakistan. As I said in that introduction, nothing similar has happened in any South Asian country, but actually, something similar happened in your country. In 1993, the Supreme Court restored Nawaz Sharif when Ghulam Ishaq Khan had wrongly removed him. So, in fact, your Supreme Court has a precedent of surprising decisions that stand up for democracy at moments of crisis. This is the second.
Well, at times, at moments of crisis, they have succumbed to the gun. And at times when the gun wasn't directly pointed at their head, they have stood up. I think that's what the record will show. Hence, the importance of the so-called law of necessity. And you're absolutely right. This judgment by 5 judges, unanimous judgment, is actually quite unprecedented. The speculation was it might be 3-2 or 4-1. In fact, some people thought it might be 3-2 the other way. And during these proceedings, the judges are asking a lot of questions that suggested that they were thinking in fairly loose terms. For example, the Chief Justice himself said at one stage that, yes, it's quite clear that the order itself was illegal. There's no two ways about that. This is while the discussions are going on, indicating that, they were going to strike that down. And then he went on to say, but we also have to look at the national interest and the existing circumstances of where the country is and things like that, which this then seemed to suggest that there might be a dilution of the judgment, rather than go back ab initio to where it all started and start all over again. They might say, yes, that was illegal, and clearly that should not have happened, and we strike that down. But then they might have gone on and said, at least that was some people were speculating that now that elections have been ordered and both opposition and government have been saying that they want elections. So what's the big deal? Why not just move along and now have these elections and let the people be the final arbiters of what needs to be done and who's right and who's wrong? And I say this because there's another precedence when something like this exactly happened. And that was in 1988 after Ziaul Haq perished in an aircraft. He had then dismissed a government and had ordered fresh elections 3 months hence. And
This
during
is the
that period,
government. This is the Junejo government.
This is the Junejo government. And Junejo had been sacked by Ziaul Haq. And Junejo's people had gone to the Supreme Court in appeal. Ziaul Haq perished in that 3-month period. The army chief, the new army chief, General Aslam Beg, went to the court and said, we don't restore Junejo. We want the elections process to go ahead. In any case, we not bring in back democracy. Those were non-party elections that had brought Junejo to power under a dictator. He's gone. So let's open it up. And the court at that time said, yes, that sounds reasonable. We think the dismissal was illegal. It shouldn't have happened. But now that we are moving on and there's a consensus in the national interest that elections should be held, so they ordered the elections to go ahead as scheduled. And so there was a fear that this time round, the same sort of thing might happen. Of course, the opposition this time was deadly against this, because that would have meant leaving Imran Khan in the seat to put together a caretaker government and carry on the quick elections, the process of following on with quick elections without any electoral reforms. Now, this is a critical point that actually came up during the court hearings when the Chief Justice called Shahbaz Sharif, the Prime Minister to be, to the court and said, I want to ask you a question. You have always said you wanted elections. Now the government has given you elections. So what's the big deal? Why are you taking a U-turn now and saying, no, first we have to come to power and then we'll order the next elections? And Shahbaz Sharif gave a very brilliant answer. He said, there's only one reason for that. We too will have elections, perhaps sometime this year, but we need to carry out some important electoral reforms because the election commission and those reforms were rigged by Imran Khan to facilitate himself in in the next elections. And there's a consensus that in society, in the media, that those electoral reforms were very biased. So he said we need to fix that system so that the next elections are free and fair and are not tainted the way the 2018 elections were, because as you know, there were widespread understanding in society that those elections were rigged to bring Imran Khan to power. So that was a very persuasive argument. And I think at the end of the day, the court then realized that there was no going back to the law of necessity and circumstances. And any national interest outside in national interest of strengthening and going by the constitution, that was the best route to go.
Absolutely. And to sum up that point that you made, the court now decided that the national interest is scrupulously observing the constitution, and that means scrupulously upholding democracy and the law of the land, which is why the fact that this was unanimous and all 5 judges agreed makes it even more important. There was no demurral, no difference in their opinion.
Yep. It was not just the letter of the law, it's the spirit of the law of the constitution that has been upheld, which is why the proactive advice and instructions to the president and prime minister and speaker, meaning that you can't start clutching at various things and appealing and doing this and doing that and thwarting that process. But my sense is that Imran Khan might, I don't know his mind right now. There are people who are advising him to do the honorable thing and resign and sit in the opposition. And then there are people who are telling him, no, we can appeal against his judgment. We can try and delay it. We can try and get a stay order and blah, 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 blah.
I understand. Let me now look forward on the assumption that Imran Khan and the president will listen carefully to the Supreme Court's warning, to use colloquial language, no hera-pheri, no tricks, no gimmicks, and they will not try to find a way of thwarting or scuppering this process. First of all, the vote of no confidence will be tomorrow, Saturday. Is it now almost certain Imran will lose, assuming he doesn't attempt any of his surprises?
Well, the court has said that no later than Saturday, 10:30 a.m. It could have been today. They could have called Parliament today and said, okay, we'll do the vote today. So it's no later than 10:30. So there's a very specific limit attached. And also the fact that, they have to move on if the vote is successful to elect the new prime minister. So those are very specific instructions. And I say that the likelihood is that will happen tomorrow, barring, of course, the so-called surprise that Imran Khan has in store for us. And I'll give you just one example of the sort of rumors that are floating around. There is a rumor floated by the PTI and its supporters that Imran Khan may decide to impose an economic emergency. What has happened is that in the last 3 or 4 days, a follow-up on the deteriorating economy, the reserves of the state bank have fallen to a very low level equivalent to just 2 months of import bill. And on top of that, the dollar has shot up by 10 rupees, nearly 5% in the last 3 days. It's hit 190. It used to be 175, 176, and it's now hit 190. The stock market has crashed. The IMF program is on a standstill. They are not going to do anything until there's a new government in power. The budget is expected in May, and so it's going to be a tough budget. So there are all sorts of economic, and of course our relations with the United States are not good. Our relations with Saudi Arabia are not good, and so on. So Imran Khan may clutch at some of these arguments to say, I'm going to impose an emergency. And if there's an emergency imposed, then of course Parliament is suspended, as it were, during an emergency, in which case he could thwart this particular move. In which case, again, the opposition will have to go back to the Supreme Court with a petition to say there is no need for something like this. A new government is coming into power, and if there is a need for an emergency, let the new government decide if and when they want to impose it. But this is an attempt to thwart the process that you already ordered. So there may be some confusion and a last-ditch attempt to further muddy the waters. But I hope that is not the case.
If Imran were to try that tactic, what are the chances that the army, who's been very scrupulously neutral up till now, will say, democracy is not safe. We need to step in and ensure that there is a clear transition. Not step in to take over, but simply step in to ensure there is a proper transition and Imran's attempts to block are subverted.
No, it doesn't work like that. You see, the minute the army steps in, it is a martial law by the constitution. It can't step in and say we're just stepping in to clear up the mess. No, they can't do that. That amounts to a martial law. Then that is challenged in the courts, and then the army can't withdraw, because then that would mean that they've done something illegal. That will create problems. The army
Yeah.
has worked assiduously behind the scenes to ensure that this process is as free of trouble as possible. But Imran has been throwing a spanner in the works every now and then. So I don't see any army intervention. But now that the Supreme Court is standing up so firmly, there will be no need for it. I dare say if Imran tries something like that, might dare say the judges will knock it out the very day it is imposed. And so I think we are on the right track right now.
Absolutely. The judges took suo motu action 5 days ago. They'll take suo motu action even more quickly if Imran tries to subvert what they've ordered. Let me ask you this. If Imran's government falls tomorrow, and it's now more than likely that he's lost his majority comprehensively, his allies have left him, many of his own ranks have left him, what then will be the future of his government in Punjab? Is that also, to use a colloquialism, on the skids?
Absolutely on the skids, and again doing a lot of unconstitutional things, and again going to be challenged, and again they're going to be thrown out. What they've done is that, as a last ditch effort, Imran Khan removed the chief minister of Punjab province and appointed and nominated the chief the speaker of the Punjab Assembly as the new chief minister. He needed the speaker's votes to try and thwart the vote of no confidence in Islamabad. That's a small party called the Pakistan Muslim League Qaid. But unfortunately, now that Islamabad is gone or is about to go, the rationale and the justification for that gentleman, Pervez Alai, to become chief minister diminishes. And in fact, the members of the provincial assembly have seen the writing on the wall, and they have flocked en masse, as it were, to the opposition. And Shahbaz Sharif's younger brother, Hamza Sharif, is now their candidate for chief minister. And the opposition in Punjab had got together to move a vote of confidence, a vote of no confidence against the speaker, and then to have a vote of confidence for their own man, as it were. And the speaker, the speaker barricaded the assembly with barbed wire and police, and refused to allow them to come into the assembly chambers to hold the vote, and then deferred the session till the 16th of April in the hope that during this time he might be able to cajole, bribe, and induce members to come back to the fold. And although he'd said everything, he'd scheduled everything for the 6th, but then on the 6th he barricaded the assembly, which then compelled the opposition to go to a local hotel and have their session there, where they duly elected Hamza Shahbaz Sharif as their new chief minister. So that's in abeyance right now, and I think that will also go to the court now, and
Okay.
it might go to the Lahore High Court, because the Chief Justice has indicated that that's where you should first go if you have this sort of a problem.
Let me
I
ask you
think
this. If the Punjab Assembly also looks as if it's going to fall out of Imran's control and there'll be a Hamza Sharif-led government there, what about the other three provincial assemblies? Are they relatively safe? I assume the PPP will not want to lose control in Sindh at this moment. Imran probably has a majority in KP to hold on to that. What about Balochistan?
Well, Sindh, of course, People's Party has an overwhelming majority. They're under no threat, and they have now stitched up their relations with their main opposition over there, which is the MQM, the old party that belonged to Altaf Hussain, and now is a separate entity. So the government and opposition have actually stitched everything up, and I think the People's Party is going to ask Shahbaz Sharif to give the governorship of Sindh province to the MQM in lieu of their support, both in Sindh and in Islamabad, for the no vote of no confidence. So Sindh is stable, no issue. I don't think they're going to have elections for a year and a half. They're just going to sit pretty and consolidate their situation. KP is going to be touch and go, because right now Imran has a majority by virtue of some allies there as well. But my sense is that if Shahbaz Sharif becomes prime minister, Punjab is lost to Imran, also becomes a stronghold of the Muslim League Nawaz, then my sense is the focus will turn within months, within a month or two, to KP, where the third big important partner of this alliance that has uprooted Imran Khan is the JUI, the Jamiyat-e-Ulema Islam, led by Maulana Fazl Rahman. Maulana Fazl has a very strong base in KP province, second only to Imran Khan. And I think Maulana will urge the new government in Islamabad to help him overthrow Imran Khan's government in KP, so that he can also have a bit of a ride before the next elections are announced. So we can expect, after Islamabad, we can expect the action to shift to Punjab, and after Punjab, we can expect the action to shift back to Islamabad and then to KP. In the meanwhile, Balochistan is not going to be a problem. Balochistan has always been an outpost of the establishment and the ruling party. And I think that it's exactly what is going to be. Some of the new people who've supported the vote of no confidence from Balochistan will likely form help will likely be facilitated and helped by the federal government, the People's Party, and possibly even the establishment to set up a new government in Balochistan. That should be smooth sailing.
Before we end, let's look a little down the road to the extent that we can see that far. It's pretty certain that the new prime minister after Imran is defeated will be Shahbaz Sharif. And it's also pretty certain he will not hold elections immediately. He'll do it perhaps in 8 or 9 months at the end of the year. And you said that he's already committed himself to the Supreme Court, that he wants time to amend some electoral reforms that were wrongly put in place by Imran Khan. What are the other changes that Shahbaz Sharif will look to tackle in the 8, 9 months he gives himself? And what a priority will be in those, the emphasis he gives to the economy? Because I noticed yesterday, the State Bank of Pakistan increased the interest rate by a very steep 2.5%. And now the main interest rate is over 12%. You already talked about the economic crisis. How much of the focus in those 8 months beyond the electoral reforms will be on the economy?
I think Shahbaz will have to fight on two fronts. He will have to get the reforms done, reforms in the electoral laws and also reforms in the media, to open up the media. And because Imran Khan had passed some very repressive laws. And so the media has been hoping that Shahbaz will focus on some of that. And thirdly, on the accountability laws. The National Accountability Bureau had become a bureau to witch hunt the opposition. And its chairman's term has expired. It needs a new chairman. I don't know whether they'll be able to do that or not, because it requires a consensus between the opposition leader and the prime minister. And in the earlier months, they couldn't get that done, Imran and Shahbaz. And now Shahbaz and Imran, I don't think they'll be able to get that done so easily. Still, those are things that need to be done. And I think they will pass some amendments or some laws to dilute the victimizing part of the NAB's laws. So I think these two on one side. And I think committees will be set up to do this quickly, while Shahbaz himself is going to focus on getting the economy back on track. And that's not going to be easy. Some very hard decisions will have to be taken, which will mean hardships all around. Some of those decisions Imran wanted to take but got scared and he didn't, which made matters worse. And now I think the real challenge for the next government will be, in the few months that it has at its disposal, it has to satisfy two critical constituencies. It has to satisfy the international community that says no more loans, no more funds, no more grant unless you fix yourself and live within your means and pay back your debts, which means the IMF program, which means deflation, which means cutting down on expenditures and so on, and raising taxes. On the other side are the people. The people who have given so much support to the opposition and stood up against Imran Khan because of Imran Khan's mismanagement. They will want relief. They will want relief from electricity prices. They will want relief from petroleum prices. They will want relief from fertilizer prices. Everything that has gone up and made life miserable for them. How is Shahbaz Sharif going to balance the demands of the IMF to increase taxes, cut down spending, and on the other hand, the demands of the masses, which is spend more on us, give us more. We are in dire straits. And I think somewhere pockets will have to be cut and hands dipped into pockets to do that. And the only money there is with the rich. So how will Imran Khan, Shahbaz Sharif do that? I think that's going to be the big challenge. And mind you, last word, if he fails, he may be able to address the concerns of the international community, but if he fails to address the concerns of the people of Pakistan, which have to do with inflation, debts, unemployment, impoverization, then the next election is going to be an open election. And 6 months down, 9 months down the line, this very public that is supporting Shahbaz Sharif and Nawaz Sharif may turn against them and go back looking for Imran Khan, the great patriotic nationalistic savior. At least during his time, they felt proud. Now, if they're not going to feel proud for standing up to the great Satan America and so on and so forth, at least they will want the new prime minister and the new government to give them something for their troubles in the last 4 years.
I'll come to that point in a moment's time, but let me first put to you, how much of a challenge would it be for Shahbaz Sharif to handle the army? I know that the army will be sympathetic and supportive because they were neutral right through this troublesome transition that is ending. But one of the problems he faces is that the Army Chief General Bajwa's term ends in November. How difficult would it be to choose a new Army Chief? I imagine General Bajwa is not going to be open for another 3-year term.
A couple of quick points. The first thing is, of course, that Shahbaz has excellent relations with the military establishment. The second point is that they trust him more than they trust anybody else. He's never stood up against them. He's always said, right, we'll work together. And he's always compromised, which is what they like, work together. And the third thing is that they have worked very hard. I mean, recently, we hear of a meeting that the army chief had with officers up to the rank of colonels, in which he was trying to explain to them why it was important to get everything back on track and why they had stopped supporting Imran Khan. Because there's still a lot of support for Imran Khan in the rank and file of the armed forces and bureaucracy and the urban middle classes. And so he had to explain to them that, we had, and from what I can understand, my sources are telling me, he said to them, look, for 4 years we propped him up. We did everything possible to help him. But he just had this suicidal mission, and he kept just stepping on his own toes. We helped him at every stage. We stood on the same page with him. We protected him. We defended him. We propped him up. But it was now becoming impossible because we were being discredited for doing all this. And so now we've stepped back, and you need to understand that we cannot jeopardize our economy and our international relations at the altar of Imran Khan's misplaced concreteness. And so you need to, understand where we are today. And I think that is very important because I think they will give full support to Shahbaz Sharif to put everything right, establish diplomatic relations all over again with the United States, get the IMF program moving, re-establish relationship with China, which has been wanting during Imran Khan's time because he was critical of CPEC projects and so on. All that had come to a halt. And Saudi Arabia has been upset with Pakistan for not helping them in Yemen and so on and so forth. So I think my prediction is that the army and Shahbaz Sharif will work closely together, number one. Number two, Shahbaz Sharif's first trip will be to Saudi Arabia and or China, and one followed by the other. And then I think he will start working on repairing relations with the United States and getting the IMF program on track. So I think in the short term, he's not going to have any problems from the establishment.
And so choosing a new army chief in November will not be an obstacle or a problem?
I don't think it will be an obstacle or a problem. In the past, what has happened is that prime ministers have thought, wrongly in my view, and they paid the price for it. They thought that they would pick their own man from amongst the corps commanders. Sometimes General Zia was number 8 in line, and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto picked him out of obscurity and put him in charge of the army because he thought he would be a loyalist, and he didn't have any political ambitions. In the end, it was, of course, completely different. And similarly, Nawaz Sharif has tried to do that, handpick his army chiefs. And that hasn't really worked because the army chief is, at the end of the day, he may be the one guy who, when he waves his little finger, and I quote an army chief is telling me this, that when I do this to my chichi finger, 1 million men move from one place to another. And so that's how powerful the Pakistani army chief is. One man. The entire army follows. That's why there's never been any colonel coups or brigadier coups or major general coups. This is one-man army at the end of the day. It's so strong and so disciplined. And so therefore, my sense is that General Bajwa will not be seeking another extension. That's my sense. And therefore, Shahbaz Sharif will have to select a new army chief in come November. It will not be the gentleman that Imran wanted, that he had handpicked, who had helped him rig the last elections. And some of us are hoping that none of this business about the 4th and the 5th being picked up will happen. There is now a rule in the judiciary that the senior most judge becomes the chief justice. There's no question of pulling out three names and then out of the three names getting one to bypass the other. Many years ago, the judiciary stood up against a dictator, and then in the success that followed, it held that in future only seniority will count and the government will not be in a position to appoint the army chief. And that is what has happened. Now we've been just following the seniority principle. So we now know who the chief justice is going to be 10 years hence. So there's no confusion on that. And there's no personal ambitions tugging here and tugging there and conspiracies happening there. And I think it would be a great idea if the same sort of thing could happen in the army, that the senior most army general becomes the chief. And when he retires, no extensions. And when he retires, the next senior most in line becomes the army chief. That will get rid of all ambitions and all attempts to destabilize and for personal reasons and so on.
Two more questions before I end. You've already indicated in your answers that there's likely to be a change in the relationship with America. General Bajwa made it clear that he wanted it when he spoke at the Islamabad Security Dialogue last Saturday. And that also means that there will be a change in the relationship or the attitude to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What about any possibility of something improving with India? Or is that unlikely? Will that be an area where Shahbaz will be very cautious and he will not feel any need to do it quickly?
I think caution will be the need of the hour. Imran Khan will be looking to attack the new government on either if it takes too quickly steps toward to normalize relations with India, and similarly with America, they'll have to move very carefully. And Shahbaz is a cautious man, and so I don't think that is on the cards in the near future. But having said that, I think when the next government comes in, not the Shahbaz Sharif government, when elections are held, and if the Noon League and the Nawaz League is returned to power for 5 years, then I dare say Nawaz Sharif will want to move back to his older agenda, which was to normalize relations and to try and find some solution that is acceptable to both sides. If you recall, such a solution was proposed and almost clinched during Musharraf's time, which basically meant that let's normalize and open up Kashmir on both sides and leave it for the next 50 years to finally think about the final status of Kashmir. But in the meanwhile, let's get on with opening up trade and other barriers between the two Kashmirs and giving them autonomous administrations and so on, but for both sides to retain their part of it in legal terms. So I think those formulas are still up there, but now I think things have changed in India. So even if Pakistan were prepared to move along the same lines, I can't say you're in a better position to say what India will do or not. But then, of course, the whole question of your prime minister and what happens next in your elections is going to be very important.
Absolutely. My last question, what are the chances that when elections happen, because of the difficulty and the conundrums you spelled out handling the economic situation, and because in a country like Pakistan, it's always appealing to say the Americans threw me out and Imran will no doubt play that card. What are the chances that 8-9 months down the road, Imran could be back in power?
I don't think he'll be back in power, but I fear that if this is the next regime, the Shahbaz Sharif regime, doesn't stitch up some important points properly, I think Imran may come back to give them a run for their money. I can't then say that it's taken for granted. Today, if the elections were held, the Muslim League would sweep to power. If Imran resigns from the assemblies tomorrow and by-elections are held, they'll get 100% majority. And they can then do whatever they like with the constitution. So I hope that doesn't happen. I don't want anybody to do whatever they like with the constitution. These 2/3 majority business can be quite problematic in part of given our culture for authoritarianism and majoritarianism and all the rest of it in this whole subcontinent. So I think Imran would be advised not to resign, to hang in there, to become a good opposition leader, and to keep the next government on its toes, and then to fight a clean election and see where it takes him. But if this next government doesn't, as I said, get its act together, Imran will have a fertile ground to try and make a comeback.
So we end on this note. The Supreme Court faced perhaps the biggest challenge any Supreme Court in our part of the world has faced, and it's acquitted itself with flying colors. Now, the new government, when it comes in, will face an enormous challenge. And how the Shahbaz government handles that challenge will determine the future of democracy and the future of Pakistan. A lot now will be riding on Shahbaz Sharif's skill as Prime Minister.
Absolutely right, and I think he knows it, and he's humbled by that. And he's already said that he will not go into any victimization mode against Imran Khan, the way Imran Khan went against him. He's asked Imran to join hands with the rest of the parties to build a national government of sorts that can cope with these problems in the interim. I don't think Imran will rise to the occasion. I think he will do everything he can to undermine this next government. That's politics.
Najam Sethi, thank you very much for this enlightening interview and for explaining in particular that very important part of the Supreme Court judgment, which, as I said colloquially, means a warning to the Prime Minister, the Speaker, the Deputy Speaker, and the President: no hera-pheri, no more tricks, at least until the new Prime Minister is elected. That, in a sense, makes the Supreme Court ruling particularly novel and powerful. And I don't believe I can think of a court that has ruled not just over what's happened in the past, but given clear orders about how you behave in the future. Thank you very
One
much.
last word. One last word. 2 weeks ago, I wrote an editorial welcoming the new Chief Justice Umar Ata Bandyal. And my parting words were that you are going to be heading a court at a very critical moment in history. And what you say or do will determine many things, for better or for worse. And today I tweeted, I said, you're the history man.
That's a wonderful way of putting it. The Chief Justice of Pakistan is the history man. He has truly made history for himself, and much more importantly, for his country and its democracy. Thank you very much indeed, Najam Sethi. Take care, stay safe. Good luck to your country.
Thank you, Karan. Thank you.